Orlando Easton Harris's life story before the tragic events of October 24, 2022, begins in St. Louis, Missouri, where he grew up in a household that was loving but burdened by the increasingly overwhelming challenge of supporting a young man struggling with profound, worsening mental health issues that gradually consumed nearly every part of his existence as he moved from childhood into adolescence and adulthood. And throughout those years, people who encountered him described him as shy, quiet, and sometimes expressionless, the kind of teenager who blended into the background and seemed uncomfortable in almost every social setting, whether it was school, family gatherings, or simple interactions with peers. And this pattern intensified throughout his teenage years as Orlando became increasingly detached from friends, avoided eye contact, spoke softly or barely at all, and spent extensive time alone in his room where he retreated from the outside world. His mother, who played a central role in his life, spent years desperately trying to get him professional help as she grew more alarmed by his deep episodes of depression, emotional shutdowns, and the long periods where he isolated himself and hardly communicated with anyone at home, sometimes staying inside his room for hours upon hours without speaking. And she repeatedly contacted mental health professionals, made appointments, drove him to evaluations, and pleaded with specialists to help stabilize him. But due to the complexities of mental health care, treatment availability, and the legal limitations around involuntary intervention for adults, the support she sought often fell short of what he truly needed. And as he turned 18, the system made it even harder for her to intervene because he was legally considered responsible for his own decisions. Throughout late high school, Orlando struggled severely with social anxiety and feelings of isolation. He often described himself as someone who had no friends, no girlfriend, and no meaningful connections. And although teachers sometimes encouraged him to open up or participate in activities, he usually remained quiet, staring downward or nodding minimally. And when he did speak, it was often short, strained, or full of self-defeating statements about his lack of confidence and inability to fit in. By the time he reached early adulthood, Orlando's emotional distress had become a persistent, suffocating force in his life, shaping how he viewed himself and the world around him. His family noticed that he spent more and more time online, staying up late researching topics involving violence, loneliness, and mass shootings, although the exact depth of this research was only discovered after the tragedy. He kept notebooks and loose sheets of paper where he wrote long, fragmented reflections about his pain, his sense of being invisible, and his belief that he had no place in society. His writings often described him feeling like a failure who could not achieve normal milestones such as making friends, succeeding academically, or building relationships, and these internal struggles gradually matured into a dark obsession with the idea of making a final statement that people could not ignore. In mid-2022, Orlando purchased an AR-style rifle, which deeply alarmed his mother when she discovered it. And fearing for his safety and the safety of others, she called the police, insisting the weapon be removed from their home. Officers did temporarily take it, but since Orlando had no criminal record and no active mental health prohibition preventing him from owning a firearm, they legally transferred the rifle to a third party from whom Orlando later retrieved it. And this chain of events, though tragic in hindsight, reflected a series of limitations in the legal system rather than negligence by family or police. Throughout August, September, and October of 2022, Orlando's behavior grew more erratic and emotionally unstable. He often paced around the house late at night, spoke very little, ate irregularly, left home without explanation, and drove for hours through St. Louis streets, sometimes parking in isolated areas to write long entries in his journal about how he felt abandoned by life and convinced that nothing could improve. On the night before the attack, Orlando barely slept. Instead, he stayed inside his room surrounded by papers, ammunition, and his clothing. Hours passed as he sat on the floor with his back against the wall, staring blankly at his rifle, then at the ceiling, then at the notebook he held in his hands. His mind drifted in and out of spiraling thoughts, sometimes whispering to himself and sometimes staying completely silent. Around midnight, he began laying out his black tactical gear with disturbing precision. Black pants folded neatly, black boots placed side by side near his bed, a tactical vest arranged on the floor, gloves positioned atop the vest, and ammunition laid out in rows beside the rifle. 4 minutes at a time he would stand motionless, staring at the equipment, then suddenly crouch down and begin loading magazines with a rapid mechanical pace before pausing again, breathing heavily, almost shaking. Hours of this unsettling preparation passed in silence while the rest of the household slept, unaware that each click of a magazine, each movement of his hands, and each deep breath was part of his final descent into the violent act he had been planning internally for months. Sometime around 5 a.m. he sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his forehead, gripping his hair, and appearing deeply conflicted. Moments later he stood up abruptly, put on his clothing piece by piece, zipped his vest, checked his pockets, and finally picked up the rifle before walking quietly to the back door of the house, where he paused again, standing completely still for nearly 30 seconds before stepping outside. Orlando got into his car, placed the rifle on the passenger seat, and sat for a long time before starting the engine. He rested his head against the steering wheel, breathing slowly as the early morning light began to appear faintly in the sky. Eventually he began driving towards Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, the school he once attended but never successfully adapted to because of his emotional struggles and social isolation. As he drove, he barely blinked, staring ahead with a blank, distant expression. Streetlights passed across his windshield in rhythmic flashes, and each time the light hit his face, it revealed a tired, strained, fragile young man lost inside layers of despair that had built over years. He arrived near the school at around 8:30 a.m., parking a short distance from the entrance. He remained in the car for several minutes, clutching the rifle, reading his notes one last time, and whispering something under his breath. Something that was never clearly determined but was likely a final affirmation of his decision. Teachers were arriving, students were chatting on the sidewalk, and morning traffic moved as usual. From the outside, the school looked peaceful, its brick walls lit by the morning sun. Around 8:55 a.m., Orlando opened his car door slowly and stepped out, wearing all black, carrying his rifle firmly. He walked toward the main entrance with a stiff, deliberate stride. The school's doors were locked, consistent with the building's security policy requiring external visitors to buzz in, and this locked door protocol delayed his entry just long enough for staff inside to notice him and begin reacting. Surveillance footage showed Orlando pulling on the handles repeatedly with a tense, almost frantic energy before stepping back, looking up and down the sidewalk as though contemplating something, then raising the rifle and firing multiple shots directly into the glass panes. The sound of gunfire shattered the morning calm instantly. Students inside screamed, teachers shouted for students to get down, internal radios crackled with urgent warnings, and the school's emergency lockdown system was triggered. The glass shattered enough for him to reach inside and unlock the door manually, and as he stepped inside the hallway he swung the rifle left and right, scanning the area with a cold, rigid posture. Students in the hallway froze in shock for a split second before running in every direction, some falling, some dropping backpacks, some crying out for help. Orlando raised the rifle and opened fire without hesitation, and chaos filled the halls as teachers frantically pulled students into classrooms and locked doors behind them. 15-year-old Alexandria Bell was walking nearby with friends when the shots were fired. Unable to escape quickly enough, she was targeted and fatally shot, and the hall around her erupted in screams as her friends fled in panic. Orlando moved through the hallway with increasing urgency, firing at anything that seemed to impede him. Classrooms shook as bullets punched through wooden doors and splintered frames. Students hid under desks, behind shelves, inside closets, and behind band equipment, covering their mouths to remain silent. Some texted their parents goodbye messages. Others prayed quietly as the gunfire echoed around them. Orlando climbed to the second and third floors, shooting at locked classrooms and muttering under his breath. Some students hiding inside heard him breathing heavily outside their doors, heard the click of his rifle adjusting, and saw shadows under the door as he stepped side to side. He approached the classroom of health teacher Jean Kupska, who immediately moved to protect her students, ushering them toward escape routes as Orlando approached. When he reached the doorway, she positioned herself between him and the students, and Orlando shot her, killing her while students behind her fled through a connecting door, screaming as more bullets hit the walls. The hallways filled with smoke, debris, shell casings, and the lingering echo of continuous gunshots. Within minutes, police arrived at the school and rushed inside. Officers advanced rapidly, guided by the sound of gunfire and terrified students who pointed them toward the upper floors. The officers kept low, weapons drawn, moving past broken glass, injured students, and shattered doors. The intercom system malfunctioned under the pressure of multiple people trying to use it, so officers relied on their tactical training and the audible trail of shots. As they moved upward, they braced for direct confrontation. The moment they reached the third floor around 9:15 a.m., Orlando opened fire on them, initiating a chaotic and intense exchange of gunfire. Bullet impacts rang against the walls as officers shouted commands and pushed forward. Orlando retreated slightly but continued firing, moving erratically between the hallway and the corner areas. The firefight lasted several minutes, during which officers coordinated movements, returning fire at Orlando whenever he appeared. Eventually, at around 9:23 a.m., officers shot him multiple times, causing him to collapse. Officers approached cautiously, secured the rifle and attempted to render aid. Orlando was still alive when they reached him, breathing faintly, but his injuries were severe. Paramedics transported him to the hospital where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Meanwhile, officers continued clearing the building, finding students trembling, crying and begging to know if it was safe to leave. Some students emerged from classrooms with their hands raised, others clung to teachers and many were escorted out in small groups. Outside, parents screamed, hugged their children, collapsed in relief or heartbreak and anxiously searched for loved ones. Investigators began piecing together Orlando's motive by analyzing his writings, which they found in his car. The notes expressed profound agony, loneliness, and resentment. He wrote about being alone his whole life, about never having friends or a girlfriend, and about feeling like he was born to suffer. He described his life as meaningless and himself as invisible. He wrote that he wanted people to know his pain because he felt nobody had ever listened to him. In his home, investigators found journals, ammunition, and documentation of his deteriorating mental state. They learned that his mother had tried desperately to help him, contacting police earlier in the year about the firearm and repeatedly seeking mental health intervention for him. The tragedy highlighted painful shortcomings in mental health laws, the difficulty families face when trying to intervene for adult children, gaps in firearm regulations, and the unpredictable, devastating consequences when a person suffering from severe psychological anguish reaches a point of irreversible violence.